Hey everybody, welcome back. We're here with Jim Zub, writer of the brand new Conan the Barbarian series from Titan.
Yes.
So, Conan the Barbarian.
I've heard of him.
Understand that there is almost 100 years of history to this character now.
That's true.
And
no pressure.
Yeah, like and countless stories and deep lore and mythology. How do you as a writer approach this? Because it's intimidating.
It is, and yet what I think is really amazing is that Conan is easier to jump into than almost any superhero title, because there is a broad kind of continuity, and yet the pitch is so simple. Conan is a wanderer. He is a survivor in a world that is harsh and brutal. Magic is mysterious and dangerous, and wherever this guy goes, there's going to be incredible adventure. And that's all you need to know as a brand new reader. If you've never read a Conan book before, dive in. You're going to have an absolute blast. This is the original sword and sorcery character, and we're doing it up in a way that feels hopefully both classic and contemporary.
There is such a classic feel to this book. I mean, the art.
Yes.
Is it Rob de la Torre?
Yeah, Rob de la Torre, raging Rob de la Torre. He is absolutely phenomenal. He has been an artist I've been wanting to work with for years. He is a complete artist, top to bottom. And we are working in tandem in a way that I can say I haven't worked with almost any other artist. So I'm doing this very old school style. Normally, in the modern era, most people do what's called full script. So they write page 1, panel 1, here's what's happening, here's the text. For this one, I do these broad outlines. I say on these pages, these things happen. Rob does this unbelievable sweeping artwork, and then I come in and I dialogue it. So I'm looking at his jaw-dropping, black and white line work, and then I'm trying to live up to it in the narrative. And because he's so good, it pushes me harder. I want to make this beautiful. I want to hit that kind of classic Robert E. Howard style of, text and prose, and make it as just punchy and pulpy as I can. Yeah.
So you're kind of working, I mean, they used to call it Marvel style,
yeah,
right?
That's exactly what it was.
John Romita Jr. once corrected me when I called it Marvel style. He's like, it's Lee Kirby style.
It is Lee Kirby style. That's the way Roy Thomas did it back in the days with Barry Windsor Smith and with Big John. And so it does feel kind of appropriate that we're doing it old school and we're bringing it old school, and yet we've got the fidelity of a modern comic, and we've got the kind of space and room to do these multi-part stories, and we can go really epic. Well, I'm really looking to hew to the original Robert E. Howard canon, where we're referencing those original 21 stories in really cool ways, but we're not doing adaptations. A lot of people ask, oh, are you going to do Tower of the Elephant? Are you going to do, Red Nails? Like two of my favorite stories, absolutely inspiring, but we don't want to be a cover band. I don't just want to play the hits. I want like new stuff that feels like the best, that from month to month you can discover the book and not know what's coming next, instead of waiting for the plot point that you've seen adapted multiple times before, Yeah.
But for a first issue,
yes,
this is still like a fairly young Conan, right?
Yes.
He's 24 in this. Right. So, you're just kind of slotting this in. Will future story arcs, because like Howard's, correct me if I'm wrong, Howard's original stories were not chronological tellings of Conan's life.
The first published Conan story, he's already a king. That's Phoenix on the Sword. And then he jumped back to earlier moments. And so it has a fun kind of rambling quality, Conan in these different snapshot moments of his life. And we're doing similar stuff in the sense we are going to be jumping around the timeline, but thematically each story will build on the next. So for example, in this one called Bound in Black Stone, which is our first story arc, there is an object, there are plot points that are going to carry through to the second story arc, where we jump ahead to a slightly older Conan, and stuff that happened in the first 4 issues are going to, the checks are going to have to be cashed on things that he does in the earlier issues. Bad stuff that bubbled up is coming back in a big way. And so you can read each of the adventures on their own, but if you continue to read the series, you're going to see these really cool interconnected pieces of the broader mythology.
I want to talk about just kind of the footprint of Conan, because most people are only aware of this character because of the wonderful John Milius movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. But that movie is 40 years old.
And it casts a really long shadow. Because Milius was taking bits and pieces of all the Robert E. Howard stories he liked, which includes Kull the Conqueror, which includes everything from, he's got little funky bits from Solomon Kane and Dark Agnes and all these other characters, plus his own vision for what would make an entertaining film. It is a super entertaining movie that blew my mind when I was a kid, but as a pure pure adaptation of Howard, it's not really that. It's its own beast. And I love it. And it's got the greatest soundtrack in all of, you know, fantasy moviedom, but it's not the source material. And so my job is like, I want you to feel the way you felt when you watched that movie, but I'm also trying to hew to the canon as much as I can and bring people back to those stories. And there's a reason why so many of the pulp writers have fallen away, and we don't know their names, but we know H.P. Lovecraft and we know Robert E. Howard, because they are the greatest of that generation of writers doing that material. And so it's like, if I can get you to check that stuff out and you know that we're, you know, doing it right, then I've done my job, you know? Yeah.
When you talk about the canon, do you only consider Howard stories canon?
Those are absolute canon, so those will always be. And then I got my choice to use whatever else I want amongst the other comics or other stories. And so sometimes I'm putting stuff in there just because I personally really like it. But those are the only ones where those are sort of, you know, immovable milestones. But again, as a reader, you don't need to know them. Whether or not I'm referencing them, my job is also to make a super entertaining story that a new reader can jump in and they, you know, sword and sorcery, badass action and crazy dangerous magic and monsters. And this is going to be a ride. That's the most important thing to me, is that if you're a hardcore fan, and there are so many of them, and they love this stuff like I love it, there are literally people with PhDs and who are scholars of the literary material. If I can please them in these little nuanced ways, that's great. But your average person can just pick it up and read and have a good time.
Well, let's talk about that for 1 second, because when you think about like fictional, you know, like fictional worlds that merit that kind of depth and study.
Right.
Obviously, you know, there's broad mythological stuff like, you know, Greek mythology and you know, but Tolkien is like considered respectable, I guess, in academic like academic circles.
Yeah.
Whereas it's not necessarily the case with Howard.
But that was the pulps, right? They always felt like it was underserved. It was insanely popular, and yet people felt, but comics have always felt that way. You know, Stan Lee didn't get his due when he was making it. That's why his name's not Stan Lee. It was Stanley Lieber. He didn't use his real name because he thought it was beneath him to have a pen name. Or sorry, it was beneath him, so he gave himself a pen name, right? And so I feel like that's just the scrappy position that the pulps have always been in. And yet now in the rearview mirror, we go, well, why has this stuck around? Why is this part of the human psyche? Because it speaks to something visceral, right? I think sword and sorcery speaks to something visceral in a world where we're all interconnected and we can, you know, find any piece of knowledge at our hips with our cell phones, and we can always navigate where we are. A sword and sorcery world where you don't know what's around that next corner, where things are dangerous, where the unknown is such a broad and scary thing, and these characters are confronting it and surviving whatever danger comes their way. There's something very intrinsic and powerful about that, and that's why this stuff sticks around. And that's the kind of quality that we need to, you know, interject into our entertainment. Yeah.
Well, I don't think we can end on a better note than that. So, folks, check out the brand new Conan the Barbarian #1, out August 2nd from Titan. Jim Zub.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
It's a great time.